Hey everybody, it's Michael from Wahoo Comics here with another comic investing video where I share some investing tips and then show off some books that demonstrate those tips in action. But before we get to today's topic, I first wanted to announce that this past week we passed 300 subscribers. And so I'm going to be doing my 300 subscriber giveaway in the next couple of days. And so keep your eyes peeled for that video to see if you won either Spider-Man 2099 number 1 or Spectacular Spider-Man number 99. Now this also means that beginning with this video, I will be starting up my 400 subscriber giveaway. And I'll announce what books will be given away in a couple of weeks. But even with this video, if you subscribe or leave a comment, you'll be entered into a drawing for those books. And then every video from now until the time we reach 400, you'll get another entry for every video you comment on. So make sure you leave your comments here because you are going to want to get your hands on one of these books. All right. Well, today I thought I would talk about 5 attributes that I look for in a comic key that makes me want to make that book a part of my personal collection. But I'm going to rank those attributes in terms of which ones I consider are least valuable to most valuable, or least reliable to most reliable in terms of them being an investment. And hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, I think it will as we go through the list. So at number 5, I like to buy keys that have significant events in them. So that have a death of a character or their origin or a storyline that's used in a movie or a TV show. And what's really interesting about this attribute, and this is actually what really inspired me to make this video, is that back when I first started collecting in the 90s, I would have ranked this as the number 2 most reliable key in terms of investing. And so it's really falling down the list, and I think it's really interesting to realize that the market changes over time, and interest changes over time. But of course, an interesting question to ask is, well, why? What's changed? Why are significant events not appreciated as much as perhaps they were a few decades ago? And I've got some theories. And the number 1 theory I have, and maybe somebody has shared this before, I haven't heard anyone at least, but I think slabs have really changed the game in terms of what people appreciate about their comics. So of course, if you get a book slabbed, you no longer have access to what's inside of the comic. And so I think over time, as people have gotten more and more books slabbed, what's inside of the comic has just become less important to them since they never get to really appreciate that. And on the flip side, though, this means that the outside of the comic has become really important to collectors. And especially with a slab, of course, they become much easier to display and can even truly be pieces of art that are around a home. And so this is a bit of foreshadowing, but this means, of course, covers have taken on more importance in terms of what makes them reliable as an investment. But the inability to access the interior of a comic because of slabs, I think, have driven storyline keys down in value, as well as an increasing number of retcons that happen in comics. So there might be this storyline that you think is really important, but then if it gets retconned 5 or 10 years later, who really cares? And this is especially true, I think, of deaths. You know, when I was, again, collecting in the 90s, certain characters' deaths were considered real collector's items. And then when somebody would be brought back to life, the comic community would be upset about that. And the saying was, man, people would pout and be like, everybody dies except Bucky, Jason Todd, and Uncle Ben. Well, of course, Bucky and Jason Todd aren't even dead anymore. And so it feels like, who cares about a death of a character anymore because it's not going to stick. In the same way, kind of different, the more modern storyline events that are important are ones that are in movies. People get really excited, maybe with Civil War or Secret Invasion coming up, or just a comic that has a scene that's in a movie. People really care about it when the movie's out. but as people move on from that movie to the next one, then interest in the books that have those storylines just begins to peter out as well. Going back to the earlier point with the slabs, something I meant to say, I think it's kind of interesting, and you might have experienced this. I think people probably my age and older, I'd say old timers in the comic collecting, you'll often hear them complain about slabs, I think, more than newer collectors. And I've heard this time and time again, and it's a valid way of thinking about it. But I hate slabs because books are meant to be read. Because that's what really was important, again, to my generation older, reading the book, what's inside of the book. And I think newer collectors are less concerned about that. And again, that's going to show up in the prices of these books in the long term. All right, so number 4 is a key attribute that I look for in a key is if it's a key that is connected with a certain writer or artist, something that is considered one of their best achievements, maybe one of their best stories or one of their best covers or something like that. And I really enjoy that. If you watch my videos, I'm a big Todd McFarlane fan, and so I'm trying to collect all of his pre-image, at least Marvel covers. And so those are real collector's items, and those books have some real value. But I'm really wondering if they're going to be valuable in the long run, at least as valuable as they are now. And again, my wheels have been spinning. I've been thinking about this. I really would compare keys in this category, in my opinion, possibly to sports card collecting, which is something else I did in the 90s that I don't do really anymore. I grew up a sports fan, and so loved collecting baseball cards and football cards. But the problem with those cards as investments compared to comic books is eventually the players that you care about get old and they retire or quit. And so I remember, as a kid, certain players that were big time players and their cards were really valuable at the time. There are probably a lot of you younger viewers that wouldn't even have heard of them. So I remember in the 80s when I first started watching baseball, Dale Murphy was the MVP, and I loved him, and we had TBS, and so Braves games were always on, and so his cards were hot. But who in the world cares about Dale Murphy cards anymore? Even people who make the Hall of Fame, Tony Gwynn, who cares about his cards anymore? People, you might have some subset of people that collect Hall of Famers like Tony Gwynn, but you don't really have a lot. And so right now, Mike Trout cards are really valuable since he's arguably the best player in Major League Baseball. But are people really going to care about Mike Trout 20, 30 years from now? I don't know. And this is what's one of the reasons I really think comics has a huge edge over sports card collecting, because Spider-Man doesn't age, right? Batman doesn't age. They stay the same age. And so you can have these characters still be important for decades and possibly centuries. Who knows how long people are going to care about comics. Whereas, again, there's a cap on how long people will care about certain sports players. And the same might be true of artists. Time will tell. Will my grandchildren care about Todd McFarlane in the way that I do? I don't know. I think it's much more likely that they care about Spider-Man in the way that I do, or Batman in the way that I do, and maybe Todd McFarlane. Because there are, even in sporting cards, there are still some people who are popular over generations. And I think that's especially true for some of the real old-timers. And I think part of that is because they were kind of pioneers in the sport, and there's very few sports cards available for them, and so that keeps those cards valuable. And so that in comic collecting, that might be like a Jack Kirby. He's a pioneer. One of the earlier ones, getting his comics are hard to come by, especially in a high grade. And so I think collecting Jack Kirby covers are a little more secure than collecting a modern artist's cover. But again, I think it's cool to collect. I still want them, but if we're talking about purely as an investment, I would say they're less reliable than some of the other ones, just because we don't know, again, if people will care about these people who eventually will retire and pass on. All right, number 3, and I kind of foreshadowed this one, are iconic covers, and especially covers that contain the first full cover appearance of a character, especially if it's their first actual appearance. That's the best of both worlds. But at least a first cover appearance is really valuable, key. And I think that's something that I think as slabs I really believe that slabs are going to continue to grow in popularity, because I believe more and more people are appreciating, again, the display aspect of the comic books, or just being able to flip through and look at these beautiful covers. And so this is one that wouldn't even been on my list when I collected in the 90s. Like, I never heard anybody say, and I'm sure there were some, but among the people I talked to, and like when I would look at like Wizard, I don't remember a lot of talk about all of these iconic covers that you had to have. Like, I don't remember back then, even though it would have had like people saying, oh, you've got to have this Jack Kirby cover. I mean, they would certainly say Jack Kirby art is cool, but they wouldn't say it in the way that they do now, or even Todd McFarlane, obviously spent some time, so that's part of it. But Incredible Hulk 340, like, I didn't even know that was a big deal, like it is now. And I think I don't know if it's going to leap over the next two, but this is the one that I think has had the biggest increase in reliability, where the storyline attribute is the one that I would say had the most decrease in reliability. All right, number 2, our first solo series of popular characters. I think these are real reliable investments, especially obviously when we're talking about the big name characters like Wolverine #1, Moon Knight #1. But I released a video earlier this week. There's more budget-friendly versions that I think over time could gain in value, like Gambit #1, Rogue #1. These popular characters that will be around for hopefully a long time. And I think they're just great because, of course, for a lot of these characters, their first appearance, which, spoiler alert, that's going to be #1, just become unattainable because they get priced out of them. And then you start thinking, oh, well, I love Wolverine. I would love to have Incredible Hulk 180 or 181, but I just can't afford it. Well, what's the next thing to get? And it's cool to have a Wolverine #1. Like, this is his first book. And I really just think that's fun to collect. But I also think that's something collectors will appreciate for a long time. And then, of course, that brings us to #1, which is the first appearance of a character in a comic book. That is the most reliable thing, I think, when it comes to a key maintaining its value. And so, Incredible Hulk 181 will always be valuable. 180, Giant Size X-Men 1, Amazing Fantasy 15. I mean, all of these things are going to be super valuable, and those are the big ones. More recent ones, New Mutants 98, Batman Adventures 12 for Harley Quinn. I mean, I think those are as blue chip as you can get when you're listing these attributes. And of course, there's other attributes to collect. I just mentioned 5 of them. And really, the number 5, the significant event, I don't really collect that anymore but I did as a kid, so I put it on the list, and I just think it's interesting, how it's changed in its reliability. But down in the comments, I'm curious, what are attributes you look for? I know a lot of people look for second appearances. That's not something I personally am really excited about. I'd much rather have their first appearance or their first solo series. But second appearance is cool. Also, I see why people do that. Do you like those? Do you like first meetings of characters that come together, or something totally different? Tell me in the comments. All right. Well, that'll bring me to the books that I want to show off that I've recently picked up that show some of these tips in action. First of all, we've got Astonishing Tales #25. And this is one of my favorite Bronze Age keys that I think has a lot of room to grow. And it, if you can check multiple of these attributes off, obviously that's the best thing. This is what you have the first appearance of Deathlok and his first cover appearance, and it's pretty early George Perez artwork, and I am uncertain of this. Is it his first cover? I might be totally wrong with that, but for some reason, I know it's at least early artwork that he did, so it checks off a lot of boxes. This character was in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show, and it's to be seen how much of that's going to be in the official MCU. But I think eventually, I have hope that he'll be on the big screen. I think he's a fun character. Obviously, asks a lot of interesting ethical questions with, man and machine. And so I've wanted a copy of this for a while, and I'm really happy that I was able to get it. And the other kind of bigger key that I recently picked up was this one, Amazing Spider-Man number 316. This also checks a few boxes, and this is what I'm especially excited about because I've wanted it for a while. It contains the first full cover appearance of Venom. 315 is his technical first appearance, but it's like just this tiny head here where he says check out what's inside or something like this. But this is the cover that people really care about. Like, this is the first real Venom cover. But it's also an early Todd McFarlane cover, and still a very early appearance of Venom. Maybe his second full appearance. I'm not so sure about that. But a great book to have. If you've been watching my videos, again, I'm trying to collect all the early McFarlane covers. And so, this is the next on the list. I've got Amazing Spider-Man 300, Incredible Hulk 340, and so this was next on my list. And speaking of that, I also got 301 from the same seller, which is probably, I think, the next most valuable one on that list. And then I'll just show off, I filled out some more of that early McFarlane run. These aren't nearly as valuable as those two, but they're cool and do have some value. 302, 303, 310. And if you know, I'm also trying to collect a full run of Amazing Spider-Man over time, and so of course these are all adding to that as well. 313. I don't have 312. 314 and 317. So super excited to have all of these McFarlane Amazing Spider-Man covers, and got a couple of others that aren't from that run, but also McFarlane covers. Marvel Tales 225. 226. He did a big run on Marvel Tales, and then Incredible Hulk 341. So anyway, super excited to have all those. And of course, those other McFarlane covers, if you're a fan, those early Marvel, like the 341, it's much more affordable, obviously, than 340, but it's still an early McFarlane cover, so a cool one to pick up. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. Comment down below, again, what are some attributes you look for, where you would rank them. Do you disagree with any of my rankings, any of that kind of stuff? Of course, again, if you haven't subscribed, I'd appreciate if you'd consider doing so, and hope you enjoyed it. Like the video, all those kinds of things, and look forward to seeing you in the next one.